So over 40% of participants in the latest Corruption Watch study reported in interactions with officials about their experience of corruption. The survey titled The Impact of Corruption, Insights from Perceptions and Experiences highlights the prevalence of corruption practices within both the public and private sector in South Africa. Let's get some analysis on the study. We are now joined by Acting Lead Coordinator for Stakeholder Relations and Campaigns at Corruption Watch, Melusi Ncala. Melusi, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. Before we go into the findings of the survey, speak to us about why you've come up with this particular survey and what the intention is.
Good morning, Aldrin, and thank you for having us this morning. So the idea of this was to gauge public sentiment on their perceptions of corruption, but also we went a step further to see what their experiences are. I mean, we are an organization that already sees reports of corruption, but in this particular instance, we thought that we should survey at least 1,500 respondents, citizens of this country, based on what's been happening in the last 5 years. And this sample is demographically represented based on our society.
Yeah. And then very important as well, the question that you asked the respondents, I think which is quite critical, is the knowledge of laws and agencies in this country to fight corruption, even before we deal with the perception.
Yeah, I mean, you will know that based on the outcomes of the study, that 54% of respondents said that they do have a limited understanding of anti-corruption law and just the environment as well, whereas only 20% indicated that they have a good understanding of anti-corruption infrastructure and related legislation.
What does that finding then mean for how people interact with officials, government, whether it is government officials or even sometimes in the corporate sector, about their behavior as the individual when it comes to potentially being asked to pay a bribe, for instance, or a so-called gift?
I mean, I think it depends how you approach the issue of corruption. If you think about it from a stance of morality, then you can only think to yourself that surely people on some level have an understanding that when they're being asked for a gift, that, it is wrong, particularly if it is to get a service, whether it's a magistrate, a judge, a prosecutor, a police officer. That's not how things are supposed to be done. But furthermore, it kind of illustrates how come in some instances, it's difficult to tackle the issue of corruption because those in power take advantage. They use their authority to gain favor.
Yeah, but how do we juxtapose this to, for instance, an experience in the service sector? Let's say, for instance, a teller or even a waiter. You give them a tip, and that is your expression of gratitude for the service that you've been offered. How then do you explain what gifts mean in this particular survey?
No, in this particular survey, these people were solicited. These gifts were solicited, and yes, there were instances when people made an offer, but it's instances when it's quite obvious that this is not supposed to be done. So, I mean, they were asked specifically that in terms of corruption, have you been asked or made an offer to pay an official a bribe? So it was quite clear to them that, this is something that is wrong. It's not an act of gratitude or, doing someone a kind favor.
Mm-hmm. Then looking at the graph around gifts given to officials, the yes, especially when it comes to police officers at 24%, followed by car license officers at 23%, and traffic infringement officials at 23%. Why is it easier to bribe or give a gift to an official who is either a police officer and works for a traffic department, law enforcement officer on the road, compared to, for instance, bribing a magistrate? And we see judges as well, where the bribe there or the gifts that have been offered is standing at 9%.
I mean, the research didn't go into understanding how come it would be easier, but I would, based on the knowledge that I have about reports of corruption and how members of the public interact with some of these sectors, we need to understand that in the police, there's a lot of patronage. There's already organized systems of corruption, particularly when it comes to roadblocks or people being held responsible for driving under the influence. So it's something that's already established, where the judiciary, people are more cautious and skeptical of how this might end up. And also think about it in this way, it's more the moneyed people that are likely to want to interact with law officials, your magistrates and judges and prosecutors, to kind of to get rid of a case or to do something that's unethical or illegal.
Yeah, and I think also the systemic nature of this as well, specifically with those cohorts that we're referring to now, police officers, law enforcement officers on the roads, as well as the traffic, officials at licensed departments. Because if you look at the reoccurrence of paying a bribe or giving a gift to an official, it's much higher amongst police officers as compared, once again, to judges as well as magistrates.
Correct. I mean, but also think about it this way: we've got this. We kind of categorize those types of corruption as petty corruption, in that members of the public easily, sometimes without even thinking, participate in that. They will call it a cold drink, knowing very well that I've been stopped by an official. Think about an area such as Sandton on Fridays and Saturdays when people come from nightclubs. We've had reports before that officials will look for anything upwards of 2,000 for just someone driving under the influence. So it's normalized in that particular, and it happens on an everyday basis.
And sometimes even escorting the motorist to the ATM to withdraw the money.
Yes, we've had many instances of such corrupt activity.
Yeah, let's look at the type of gifts that have been offered. We have some have offered money at 18%. Some have offered valuables, which include gold, jewelry, as well as phones, at around 3%. Food and drinks at 13%, as well as exchange with another service or favor at 5%. But money is ranked high up, 18%.
Yeah, I mean, there was a study a few years ago. Hopefully it will come back. Well, it will be released again, another edition, the Global Corruption Barometer, which highlighted that people that are rich, or at least that have access to finances, are more likely to pay bribes, whereas, poorer people struggle to do so, and they have to find other means to get by. So, rich people are twice as likely to pay a bribe, whereas poor people. But what's most concerning about that is that it means that rich people or moneyed people are able to access basic services, whereas poor people are further deprived from those services. This is something that the respondents in this study also highlighted, that when it comes to issues of land, the provision of housing, education, and health, those are the areas that are most affected by corruption.
Melusi, I just quickly want to bring up the cover, the front page of the Sowetan, because they speak about darkness in the city of darkness and danger. And one of the illustrations that you have in your information pack is in relation to this as well. You have somebody who's carrying a traffic light while a police officer is looking on, and this person is walking towards cash for scrap, like he's walking towards a scrap yard. What's happening here? What is it that we need to be dealing with here? Because also with the Sowetan story, it speaks of the thousands, 81,000 traffic lights that are not working, but that is due to vandalism.
Yeah, I mean, Aldrin, it's a state of crisis, pretty much, that we find ourselves in, to a point where certain institutions, and this is why the public has lost trust in your police, parliament, presidency, and now even more concerningly, Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 institutions, where to a point where people think that, these institutions have been crippled by corruption to a point where now such behaviors are normalized. And, when you have a society that's not driven by values and morals, then these type of things will be daily occurrences. And it comes then with no surprise that a police officer will look the other way, because in some instances, he or she will feel defeated and think to themselves, what else can I do if my superiors don't encourage lawful behavior within the rank and file? But how do I then, as a member of this institution, enforce bylaws or even legislation within the public?
Yeah. Speak to us quickly about the recommendations that you're making, including financial transparency.
So, I mean, there's several recommendations that come from this. Some of those include public education and awareness. I think, it's important that state institutions spend a considerable amount of time trying to inform and educate members of the public about anti-corruption, particularly the efforts that are being made, so that they can at least have them on board in the fight against corruption, and there can be a better understanding of how we can apply ourselves. We need to deal with issues of whistleblowing. Definitely, we can't anymore have these debates and discussions when we know exactly what the problems are. There's research to this effect, and we know exactly what to do in terms of the reform of whistleblower infrastructure in this country. And then, of course, we need to look at accountability. Accountability extends further than just people stepping down, but we need to see people being taken to court and possibly, if convicted, and then serving long prison sentences.
Melusi, thank you so much for your time. That was the acting lead coordinator for Stakeholder Relations and Campaigns at Corruption Watch, Melusi Ncala.